Metamedia presents New Horizons, conscious conversations for inner exploration and awakening with leading minds in the arts, sciences, astrology, and spirituality. Welcome to our Astro Panelist highlights for the 2024 Winter Solstice. I'm Carmen, the moderator for our discussion today. I'll be introducing each panelist before their segment. One moment while I share my screen. Our first panelist is Cayelin Castell, the co-founder of Venus Alchemy, My Star Alchemy, and the former Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. In addition to writing monthly celestial timings for nearly 3 decades, she enjoys sharing these mysteries through personal readings, her YouTube channel, and online and in-person events. Her approach is based in the visionary understanding that we inform the mysteries as much as they inform us. Welcome, Cayelin.
I had to unmute myself. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here. And so my intent is to give a sense of the solstice from what it actually is happening in the sky. This is something that has just lit me up for a long, long time, and I'm very excited to share it. So you see here a wheel with the astrology signs on the outer wheel and the constellations on the inner wheel. And this is showing how these signs do not align with the constellations that are named the same names anymore. So we use a different name for the constellations. So for example, the December solstice is the sun rises between the Archer and the Scorpion, also known as Sagittarius and Scorpio, but the signs, the 0 Capricorn point is where the sun rises at the December solstice. So it's the 0 Capricorn point, or the between, with ending Sagittarius and beginning the Capricorn season. It's also showing where the other equinox and solstice points are in the sky with the different constellations currently. Now this changes 1 degree every 72 years. So over 25,920 years, every seasonal point will be with every constellation. So part of the thing that I'm passionate about is how do we bring back the understanding that the seasonal signs have their own essence and energy, and the constellations have their own essence and energy. And they got split. They got, there's sidereal astrology and tropical astrology. How do we bring the understanding of those two things back together so we can create greater wholeness and understanding of what's happening? If we go to the next slide, we'll see this from a little bit different point of view. So you can see that there's a green line that represents the path of the planets, the ecliptic, or also known as the plane of the solar system. There's a purple line that's the plane of the galaxy, and where those two cross happens to be where the December solstice sun is rising now. It came within 1 degree in 1926. It was exact in 1998, and it leaves 1 degree in 2070, based on the calculations of the astronomer John Muse. And so if you put a 0.5 degree on either side of that, we could say the most concentrated time of that is from 1962 to 2034. We're in it. We're in that very concentrated time right now. And so something to also just to be aware of, you can see that Pluto is being shown here on the chart, and it's around 0 degrees Aquarius right now. And it's in Aquarius, but it is not in the constellation also known as Aquarius, but that what we would call the water bearer, because the confusion happens when we don't realize that the seasonal signs are different than the constellations. So if we name them a different name, then that helps us to have a deeper understanding of what's going on. So Pluto will enter the sea goat probably around 2028, and then pass through that constellation for the rest of the time that it's in Aquarius. And so the sea goat is also known as Capricornus. So this is just another view of this and how there's this galactic cross that the sun is rising on at this time. And it's near the part of the sky where we also have galactic center. And as I already mentioned, the closest alignment of it being precisely on the cross was in 1998. And the other thing to note here is that there is right above the scorpion's tail and the archers, actually the arrow, the way they draw it in this star map doesn't really point, the archer's arrow is not really pointing to galactic center, but you can see it in other times that you can see it in other fashions that it does look like it's pointing right at galactic center. So interestingly, I think it was in the 1950s when they actually discovered where galactic center is. And they realized, oh, the archer's arrow is pointing right at it, and the scorpion's tail, it's right above the scorpion's tail. So we have these two markers, like X marks the spot. And so that was pretty amazing. And if we think about the center of the galaxy as like a womb or a galactic cauldron, or the place where many things, there's lots of energy coming out of this part of the sky, and there's lots of things being pulled into the black hole, as they say, but it's a birthing point also. So having the December solstice here in this part of the sky is pretty remarkable. And in it'll be a while from now, but the seasonal signs precess or move backwards. So eventually the sun will be directly over galactic center, but that'll be a little while from now. Okay, so just another way of looking at this, and you can see where, because Mercury's at 8 Sagittarius, almost 9 Sagittarius, just above Antares, the heart of the Scorpion, as we're in this solstice time. Pluto, again, around 0 Aquarius. Sirius is at 5 Aquarius, and Venus is at 16 Aquarius. So Venus is literally visible in the sea goat or the goatfish. There's different ways that it's been called in mythic lore. And then we can see that the sun is right between the Archer and the Scorpion, or also known as Sagittarius and Scorpio. But again, we're talking about the 0 Capricorn point. So the planets move to the left, and the precession moves to the right. So they're moving in different directions as well. And the something else to just know, and about this solstice, I was listening to a biogeologist named Rory Duff, and he's been studying the ley lines of the Earth and the energies coming from galactic center. There's also other people like Nassim Haramein and Greg Braden, and those are the two I can think of right now. And they're talking about how, because we have the solstice at this point, at this time, and it can only happen every about 26,000 years, it's like the beginning of a new galactic cycle, a new galactic year. We've got the New Year's point, or the solar New Year. That's of course, in the northern hemisphere, the shortest day and the longest night, but often seen as like a new moon point of a solar year. And then we also have the sun on the galactic cross as like the new moon point or the New Year's point of a whole entire galactic year. So we live in remarkable times. It's pretty amazing. And anyway, Rory Duff has been saying that what's happening around the solstices is the ley lines of the Earth are getting amplified, and actually all the planets in our solar system are going through massive changes based on our relationship to the galactic center and the whole solar system and how it's moving in alignment with that part of the sky. And that's I think I heard Nassim Haramein talk about it, saying it's like a 30 million year cycle, that this happens about every 30 million years. So that's even bigger than the 26,000 year cycle. And it takes about 250 million years for us to make one whole complete rotation around the center of the galaxy. So that's even bigger than that. But the energies of the solstice are extending out many days. And he said in a video I just recently saw that it's going to be 96 days past the exact December solstice point that will be in a quantum harmonic convergence of energies that are activating planet Earth at this time. So knowing about this and working with this, because we're informing the mysteries as much as they're informing us. In fact, we are the embodiment of the mysteries. They live through us. So when we can work with these energies, work ceremonially, work intentionally, come from a place of heart and compassion and kindness, we can change the world, because this is the time for that to happen. So is that my last slide? Yeah, that was my last slide.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cayelin. Exciting times indeed. Let's open it up for any comments for what Cayelin just presented.
Robert.
We had Pluto conjunct the galactic center. I think it was about 16 to 18 years ago. And so every winter solstice, we had a sun conjunct Pluto at the galactic center. And at the time, I wrote that I felt like that because Pluto represents the long wave seeds that do tend to sprout across decades and even centuries, that was really a portal for these new galactic energy transformational light sources to both come in and influence us.
I agree with that 100%. Yes, I was having that experience as well during the solstices. So very powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I see that we do have some people that are popping up in chat. We will need to get through our presentation and may not be able to answer any questions at this point, but maybe our panelists will be able to address that at a later time in some fashion. Okay.
Eric wanted to say something, just letting you know.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment. Pluto in Aquarius is really about expanding our paradigms and perspectives of how we look at astrology, which is what you are really doing. And I know Ray is going to mention heliocentric. I'm into heliocentric, although I'm not talking about that today. And I just wanted to just note that getting more cosmic and less around me is where things are headed. So thank you for giving voice to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to sort of second that motion that Eric was putting out, because transformation really requires more awareness, or results from more awareness in that sense. I grew up at a time where my home was the street name, the city name, the country name, and I didn't know about the rest of the world. And little by little, I'm beginning to discover I'm in the Radcliffe wave in the galaxy, and we've been going around the center of the galaxy for 220 million years. And it's time for us, as we can see in our daily life, in our socio-political spiritual reality, that it's time for us to really figure out where we really are and what we're really dealing with, not just the fantasies and the political ideas or the spiritual following and practices and all of that, but who and where and what are we actually. We need to really work on that intentionally.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next astro panelist is Robert Wilkinson, an astrologer with over 53 years' experience as a counselor, public speaker, author, strategic analyst, and the president of Astrology Arizona. Robert publishes Aquarius Papers, the first astrological blog with a global following, and is the author of The Magic of Venus, Friendships, Soulmates, and Twin Flames, Saturn, Spiritual Master, Spiritual Friend, and A New Look at Mercury Retrograde. Robert will provide an overview of the quadrant emphasis shifts with changing rulers of the ascendants as we go east from LA to Kiev. He'll also cover key Sabian symbols and configurations and time triggers in the Washington, D.C. chart. Welcome, Robert. Please unmute yourself.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. Happy summer in the Southern Hemisphere. I like to begin these seasonal talks by reminding everybody that no matter where in the world the solstice happens, the sign positions of the planets and the aspects never change. They always stay the same no matter where you are. The only thing that changes is the ascendant and the house positions of the planets. And the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere begins a season of personal power, reorganization, rededication, release, and renewal. By seeing our place in the larger Aquarian 20-year cycle unfolding since 2021, we can experience our uniqueness, our oneness, and our relatedness in the coming season. At this solstice, all the planets are spread across 8 signs. That's actually new because usually at this time of year for the past 6 years, they've all been compressed into 3 or 4 signs. So now they're spread out across 8 signs. We do have oppositions involving Sagittarius and Gemini, Leo and Aquarius, and Pisces and Virgo. That makes this a seesaw chart, which indicates polarization that we have to transcend through getting beyond the push and the pull, getting beyond the headbutting of the oppositions, that we have to use other energies to resolve the opposition into productive stability. Also, the feature of this chart, as you're going to hear from pretty much all of our speakers today, involves this grand mutable cross. It's slightly offset because every planet is not in square with every other planet. The moon doesn't square Mercury, but otherwise there's plenty of squares. So we have the moon forming a square to Jupiter in opposition to Saturn, Mercury forming in opposition to Jupiter and square to Saturn. A grand cross involves fracturing, and the opposing forces tend to push and pull. They tend to pull in opposite directions, but in this chart, the moon and Saturn are incredibly powerful in terms of being a force for good because those 2 planets are part of a 10-pointed star of quintessential serendipity, which I'm going to discuss shortly. So turning to the sample charts. In Southern California, we find 19 Libra on the ascendant with 21 Cancer on the midheaven. You'll note this puts 4 planets above the horizon and 6 below the horizon, 4 to the east and 6 to the west. Wherever you have the most planets, that's where you're going to find the emphasis. Venus is the ruler of the ascendant. It's in the 4th house. It represents a protective influence which requires that we build through the trine to Jupiter so we can release the potential through Uranus. This is part of what I just gave a talk about, where the trines are where we build, the squares are how we release what is built through the trines. Now we turn to the Washington, D.C. chart, because this, of course, is the capital, and it's going to be very important in the coming season. Here we find 21 Scorpio rising with 2 Virgo on the midheaven. This also has 4 planets above and 6 below, but it has a better balance of 5 to the east and 5 to the west. In this one, Mars is the ruler of the ascendant, and it's in the 9th retrograde. So it's inward and or backward turned, which fits the retrograde nature of what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. And it looks like law and foreign relations will dominate the winter in Washington, D.C. This also means that the United States has between mid-Libra and late Scorpio rising, because Seattle has 14 Libra on the ascendant, Denver 29 Libra, El Paso 30 Libra, but Amarillo has 3 Scorpio. So what that means, everywhere west of the line between El Paso and Denver has Venus ruling the Libra rising. Everywhere east of that line has Scorpio rising, and Mars is ruler of the ascendant. So in this sense, our nation is pretty much split between the western half having Libra rising and the eastern half having Scorpio rising. Now we turn to London. That's where we find 19 Cap rising with 23 Scorpio on the midheaven. Here we still have 4 above the horizon, but we have 6 on the east side. Saturn is the ruler of this ascendant, and it's in the 2nd. So clearly money and finance become the issues for the United Kingdom in the coming season. Now the final chart in this sequence is the chart for Kiev. It has 11 Pisces rising and 22 Sag on the midheaven. It puts 7 planets on the eastern side of the chart. So Kiev is definitely taking command of its own destiny. It is said that when there's more planets to the east, We're in charge of our destiny. When we have more planets west, we have to make the best of the circumstances we find ourselves in. So in this case, we have 7 on the eastern side of the chart. We still have 5 above and 5 below. Here, Jupiter rules the ascendant and is square to Saturn in the first. So the conflict is very clear here. We have Moon in the 7th opposing the ascendant and Saturn, and it's part of the fracturing of the cross. So the thing is, though, is, as I noted earlier, that Moon-Saturn is part of a highly auspicious, specialized evolutionary configuration, showing promising, unique developments, despite the fragmentation of the cross. Now, just as an aside, you're not going to see this chart, but Moscow has 25 Pisces rising. That, to me, means look for dramatic developments beginning in March, with Jupiter squaring the Moon and Saturn in this chart, followed by Saturn on the ascendant, and I think that's the beginning of the end for Putin. Anyway, let's get back to the Washington, D.C. chart and talk about our nation. We have an inauguration and a major budget battle coming within the time governed by this solstice chart. We begin with the obvious, which is 21 Scorpio on the ascendant, ruled by Mars retrograde in the 9th, opposed Pluto in the 3rd. This implies that Scorpio is going to be heavily emphasized in the coming season. With the extreme intensity of Mars opposed Pluto, that requires a decrease in the corrosive use of force. So the ascendant, the what? A soldier derelict in duty. This is about necessary adjustments, the need for decisions, and the consequences of neglecting duties or having desires and obligations in conflict with each other. It's a degree of refusing to follow authoritarian patterns by demonstrating inner freedom. 21 Taurus is how that'll externalize with others on the world stage. It's a degree of discernment in seeing what's relevant and what isn't. The nadir is the foundation. It's got 2 Pisces, a squirrel hiding from hunters, showing a need for protection through some sort of concealment, caution, and refusing to do anything where the risks are out of proportion to the rewards. The midheaven is what's displayed publicly, which is a large white cross upraised, said to be a degree of a liberating ordeal. Clearly, we have difficulty on the way, and just given the religious nationalism currently seeking to dominate the nation. I mean, I think sometimes these Sabian symbols are remarkable. Mark Jones said never to take them literally, but sometimes I've found they really do work literally. Of note is the mutable cross occupies the angles. That's what's going to be prominent in the coming season. Cross includes Moon forming aspects to Jupiter-Saturn, Jupiter forming to Saturn, Mercury forming to Jupiter and Saturn. And the Moon squared Jupiter creates a hammer of Thor pointed at Pluto. All these aspects challenge right action. So find the center. Watch everything fragmenting around you, but find your center and observe how to stabilize the hostility and conflict. And this will definitely bring conflict to planets in our chart in the last degrees of the cardinal signs, the first degrees of the fixed signs, and the middle degrees of the mutable signs. And we're going to have to deal with this when the transits trigger these. And this is a snapshot of the season to come. So when the transiting planets move through this zones, it means pressure points are going to be the last weekend of December, the first week of January, mid-January, late January, the last weekend of February, and the entire month of March. So we definitely have conflict and fragmentation coming. The chart has the benefit of the Sun quintile, its ruler Saturn, and quintiles show specialization in quintessential or unique elements related to the season. We also have the Sun biquintile Mars and Uranus, Mars quintile Uranus, Saturn quintile Uranus. So we have 4 points of a great quintile operating this season. So it's a lot of unique events going on in the midst of the fracturing, indicated by the cross. And because the Moon is opposed Saturn, and tradecils the Sun and tradecils Uranus, we can include the points opposite these planets, creating zones of what I call quintessential serendipity. And the active areas are 1 to 3 Cancer Capricorn, 4 to 9 Leo Aquarius, 10 to 15 Virgo Pisces, 16 to 21 Libra Aries, 22 to 27 Taurus, Scorpio, and 28 to 30 Sag and Gemini. If you have anything in these zones, you can expect unique and specializing events. Possibility of gifts perfect for your circumstances. Maybe circumstances perfect for your gifts. To me, the opposition is the best aspect you can have because it brings awareness. And as Ray noted earlier when we were talking, awareness is the key to everything. It's why we're here. And it's how we achieve, call it functional expertise. And we do have 3 oppositions, 2 of which involve planets which rule opposite signs. Mercury is opposed Jupiter, Moon is opposed Saturn. Mars opposed Pluto rules the same signs. Now, Mercury opposed Jupiter in mutual reception, very powerful closed-circuit loop of energy, shows the need for open-mindedness and flexibility, but not so much that things get scattered. This requires that we share information with others as we learn and teach higher-level skills. Clearly, many discussions going everywhere and nowhere are indicated, with doing undoing, a quality of this opposition, especially when coupled with the Mars retrograde opposed Pluto. And that's an energy where you just have to manage it. Getting behind corrosive factors, beware of passive-aggressive people and situations, de-escalate tensions whenever possible. Again, the Moon opposed Saturn is the most beneficial of these oppositions because of the 5th and 10th harmonic angles that they make to the other planets. Basically, just stick to a plan as you navigate the endings promised by Saturn. And as a brief aside, the aspect distance, traditionally in traditional astrology, mark the timing on key events to follow. Mercury forms squares and oppositions by directed motion. It indicates major friction 4.5 to 5.5 weeks and months after the solstice. Add the forming 4-degree opposition from Mars to Pluto. That indicates friction during the inauguration and its aftermath, and the period of late April through early June when there are numerous transits through the hot zones I mentioned in the late cardinal, early fixed, and mid-mutables. So anyway, Saturn is always the ruler of the solstice, the winter solstice. And so its position is very important. Last year it was at 3 Pisces, showing that we've been experiencing a certain type of indestructibility in our life since then. This year it's 14 Pisces, showing the need for intelligence as we move through the trials of the season. Don't surrender your initiative. Set your sights high. The 2025 aspects bring new adventures. And so it's kind of like we have to fragment so that then we can build.
Oh, thank you, Robert. And just so that our audience is aware that you can look at Robert's Aquarius papers in order to find a little bit more in-depth information on the topics that he presented.
Right.
And then anyone else would like to comment on all that Robert brought forward?
I think that Robert's presentation was very, very helpful. For people who tune into this kind of broadcast, I come from broadcast. I don't know what kind of cast this is, but my leg isn't broken. The practicality of what to do with what we're facing is really important. And he pointed out in so many ways, some obtuse, some are obvious, that your choice is to respond with less tension and more peace. Because it's in each of us responsibility to live our lives in the most peaceful way we can, given the Saturn circumstances of the winter solstice and the socio-political reality we're all engaged in at this point. It's very important to have something positive to do, something positive to look forward to in the midst of a very dark time.
If nothing else, if we keep our heads when everybody else is losing theirs, we come out on the other side looking pretty good.
Liz, unmute, please.
Yes.
There you go.
Had to unmute. Had to click the button. The position of Saturn, as Robert said, is super critical. And I'm impressed with all of the quintiles because they are very gift and talent focused. But I also think that they can bring about kind of sparks of good timing, right place at the right time. The thing about Saturn that's so odd is that it's so skeptical. That's one of its big qualities is, I'm not quite buying that. I don't really want to buy the swampland in Florida sort of attitude. And I think opposite the moon, there's that, that public quality of the moon, what the public is being told or what's being circulated. But Saturn is just kind of like, no, I don't think I agree with that. So I do wonder if, in terms of media, if there's going to be less credulity with the public with that moon opposite Saturn of people like, I don't believe you, or maybe that's not the whole story, or I'm not really buying into this. So the narratives that we see broadcasted may not land very well. Or there can be an opposite reaction because Saturn is called the crooked one. So people take the message as they get it and go, no, I think it's completely different than that. I just see people processing the messaging and the narratives as not quite as smooth as maybe major media wants. I don't know. That's my comment.
Say to that point that I had a recent experience with my mom saying something to me that triggered something in me that was reflected of my interpretation and not what she intended. So I can see that occurring as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Next up is Sheri. Sheri Horn Hassan is a modern archetypal, psychological, and evolutionary astrologer, helping clients to move from chaos to clarity through astrological insight by identifying karmic patterns of habitual behavior that no longer serves them. On the board of the Astrological Society of Princeton, where she lectures and teaches, Sheri also presents a weekly podcast at karmicevolution.com. Sheri's topics are the grand mutable cross in angular houses, anxiety and lack of focus, Leo Mars opposite Aquarius Pluto, the king versus the people, and finally, Uranus in the 7th house, sudden changes in partnership. Welcome, Sheri.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I just want to state right up what you did already say, which is that I may differ from a lot of the others on this panel in that I'm not strictly a traditional astrologer. And as such, I use much wider orbs in terms of interpreting the charts. Also, because I have a weekly podcast for about the last 7 years, the last 3 I've devoted mostly to talking about politics, and I am decidedly U.S.-centric, so which doesn't certainly mean that it's not with an eye towards global events, but I'm looking at the Washington, D.C. winter solstice chart, and the first thing that caught my eye is something that Robert already mentioned, which of course is the mutable Grand Cross, which I look at as the moon opposite Saturn, and both of them in square to Mercury opposite Jupiter in mutable signs. So I want to use a quote just to start, which is that a mutable grand square or cross, they're interchangeable, right, tends to indicate restlessness, agitation, and nervousness, particularly on the mental level, although they may also heighten one's alertness. One may spread oneself too thin, which can cause inconsistent behavior with regard to one's plans. The frustrations incurred include changeability, poor concentration, indecision, negative suggestibility, and the tendency to give in rather than resist or challenge. And that is a quote from Bill Tierney's book, The Dynamics of Aspect Analysis. So this mutable cross or grand square is between, again, the 10th house Virgo moon opposite the 4th house Pisces Saturn, which we've already talked about, both in square to the 1st house Mercury and Sag opposite the 7th house Jupiter, all in the angular houses. And given what just happened here in Washington, D.C. last night, the mutable type anxiety surrounding whether or not the U.S. Congress would pass a U.S. budget continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown by midnight occurred as we approached the exact entrance of the sun into Capricorn in the 2nd house of finance at 4:21 a.m. Eastern Time. So I believe this solstice chart sets the tone for the next 3 months, and that those next 3 months will include things like they had a deal, 7th house, Jupiter and Gemini. Then someone shouted his opposition to the deal, opposed by the 1st house, Mercury in Sagittarius, and the deal fell apart. Then they had a deal again, then they didn't. Okay, there's clear mutability there, right? And that creates restlessness, agitation, nervousness, etc., which many people felt because eventually they did go back to the deal similar to the initially bipartisan one negotiated, Jupiter in the 7th, minus a raise in the debt ceiling that dismayed and depressed those who advocate against raising the debt ceiling without cuts to other places in the budget already in place, right? So, the next 3 months this will likely include a similar, as Robert used the same terminology, push and pull between financial expansion and contraction, again, as evidenced by Jupiter's 7th house square to Saturn in the 4th and the 10th house Virgo moon. The questions this Grand Cross presents to our legislators include, are we all partners in this, or are we too afraid to do the right thing for American families? Saturn in the 4th. Meanwhile, again, the 7th house Jupiter square to the 4th house Saturn indicates the dilemma in this country about whether to expand its budget deficit or to contract it. Exaggerated tales of concern that lack specific details on both sides of the aisle will be shouted about anon. And in relation to, in response to what Liz Hazel just said, I think that the media is more represented by the Mercury opposite Jupiter, and also the billionaires who own the media companies, and the exaggerative nature of Mercury in Jupiter's sign, that mutual reception that Robert mentioned. Again, remember, I'm not a traditional astrologer, but like we might interpret a trine as easy energy, which is not always the best thing for us. The wind behind your back when you're ice skating, and now you go too fast and you fall on your knees, right? So the mutual reception might actually exaggerate because both of these signs and planet, Jupiter and Sagittarius, are exaggerative. So there is a huge amount of distortion in the information that's presented, and the information is exaggerated. For example, they're now saying things like, the Republicans own the government shutdown if it had happened, but when it didn't happen, there are Republicans who are trying to place the blame now on Democrats. All right, so we can see this dichotomy between the 1st and the 7th house, the individuals and the group, or the not group, but the partners, right? So, but the anxiety, nervousness, and worry of this mutable cross exists in the people. 10th house moon, right? Mundane astrology is the people. Opposite Saturn in Pisces, which are the families, the tight-knit groups who are wondering what the hell's going on here because we're in Pisces. We don't know what's going on. They want to know what is the actual factual truth. So the dichotomy here is that Mercury opposite Jupiter is not giving people the actual factual truth. It's giving them opinion. It's giving them perceptions. It's giving them attitudes, right? But the moon is saying, well, what's the truth? Because we have to make some decisions. As Liz said, Saturn is foundational, right? It's like we gotta have something we can lay this down on that's concrete and substantial. What are our concrete physical lives going to look like as we move forward? Will we have the security in the fourth house of the family and the home? So will increasing, for example, the budget deficit ceiling decrease Social Security payments, which some 60 million Americans rely on monthly, and could create continued fears around the fact that such a move might reduce or dissolve, Social Security payments entirely at some point. And there's your Saturn in Neptune-ruled Pisces. Again, modern, okay? So next, we move on to Leo Mars opposite Aquarius Pluto and the king versus the people. Americans are asking themselves today, right at the very, start, the dawn of the solstice, right? For the next few months, who's in charge? They're calling Elon Musk the president and President-elect Donald Trump his vice president after yesterday's fiscal debacle only hours before the solstice occurred, highlighting this issue after Musk tweeted vociferously, again, Mercury Sagittarius in the first house opposite Jupiter, right? Against the bipartisan legislative deal, Jupiter in the seventh, the day before. Then evolutionary astrology, also, I want to point out that the sun is square, particularly from the second house of finance to the nodal axis, which is basically because they regress, right? It's the south node moving into the 10th house here. It's just over the cusp, and the north node moving into the fourth house. And that emphasizes, again, the question of who's in charge. In evolutionary astrology, a square of the sun to the nodal axis denotes an inability to define oneself clearly. It's a who am I loss of identity or persona. So has President-elect Trump, soon to take office on January 20th of 2025, the real president? Or is it the billionaires like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are soon to be in charge of cutting $2 trillion from the U.S. budget while simultaneously providing tax breaks for corporations and the rich at the expense, of course, of the poor and the middle class? Again, we go back to the moon being the people. I want to know. And Saturn in unclear Pisces. Are we going swimming this way or are we swimming that way? Which way we're going? What is our foundation going to look like, right? So in short, as we are moving, are we moving as retrograde Mars makes its way back to exact opposed Pluto for a second time on January 3rd of 2025, this time from Leo to Aquarius, last time was Cancer to Capricorn, to a showdown as people slowly begin to realize they've elected a pro-oligarchy administration that's reminiscent of the Gilded Age in American history, which spanned from the late 1800s through the early 20th century, when railroad barons, bankers, and others controlled all the wealth, and the rest of the nation's citizens suffered financial insecurity. Such wealth inequality led, of course, to the Depression of the late 1920s through the 1930s, before President Roosevelt began to advocate for and eventually achieve a social safety network in the form of Social Security. Now, as per MSNBC, I just want to read this one quick paragraph from December 19th. Quote, "For decades, the influence of money in politics has grown alongside the country's increasing income inequality. Those who warned about this growing influence have been thoroughly vindicated. This year, Trump's campaign was fueled by roughly $800 million from 7 billionaire families. His administration will include more than a dozen billionaires, the wealthiest since President Warren Harding's corrupt White House." And that was in the 1920s, the early 20s. We know that Pluto's now in Aquarius for the next 19 years. So the question becomes whether by the time the spring equinox occurs and Mars direct once again exact opposes Pluto on April 26th, whether larger groups of people will begin to react and empower themselves by doing so. And finally, to sum up, Uranus in the seventh house, sudden changes in partnership. This brings us to the fact that Uranus in Taurus is situated in the seventh house of partnership above the Taurus descendant in the Washington, D.C. chart at this winter solstice. The transit of Uranus through the seventh house often denotes the impermanence of partnerships. given what's been going on globally in places like Syria, South Korea, Germany, and elsewhere, especially given the repercussions of the Mars-Uranus Algol conjunction on July 15th that spurred much off with his head energies, not only in the U.S. when a Trump assassination attempt was made 2 days prior, but around the world as well. And this off with his head energy has shifted the global political scene, an energy that began with the synodic cycle at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn on January 12th of 2020. I always remember the date because January 12th was my mother's birthday. This cycle traditionally foretells such a global realignment in partnerships. So far, leading up to this winter solstice chart, and thus foreshadowing its continued triggering, we've seen the following: the resignation from Congress of Matt Gaetz and the downing of his attempt to become the new Attorney General, the announced resignation of an FBI director, Christopher Wray, the fall of Assad as Syria's dictator, the fall of South Korean president who was impeached after he instituted martial law, and that frightened people because of their past history, which included a period of martial law. The Ukraine killed a Russian general who was allegedly responsible for using chemical weapons on the battlefield, of course, in violation of international rules, whether it's the Geneva Convention or elsewhere. Something else. France's government has been imploding. Germany's government falls. The assassination, of course, of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, by a disgruntled American fan of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. The resignation of Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Finance, again, second House residence, and Deputy Prime Minister of Canada from the Canadian cabinet over President-elect Trump's threat to impose 25% tariffs on Canada, because I think that's going to be on the financial side a huge theme over these next 3 months, because he'll be inaugurated within a month. And then before the spring equinox, we'll see what happens, and it'll take effect, probably for the most part after that. The dismissal the other day of Fani Willis as prosecutor in the Georgia 2020 election case against Trump, and the potential demise of Mike Johnson as the GOP majority House Speaker on January 3rd when Mars exact opposes Pluto for the second time. And by the way, that will happen at 5. Mars will be at 5 Leo, which is Mike Johnson's. We do not have a birth time for him, but if I run a noon chart, he has 5-degree south node in Leo. So Mars sat at 6 degrees as it stationed retrograde for quite some time and just moved now. So we're only, a short time away from whether or not he's going to lose his head as well. And I'm almost done, so I don't want to take up too much time. As Uranus heads once again to conjoin Algol exact at approximately 26 degrees of 30 minutes, because Uranus is retrograde now. It'll conjoin Algol again circa early May of 2025. We'll likely see more sudden power heads failing both domestically and globally. This too may have legislative repercussions domestically from now until the spring equinox, as Vesta, the goddess asteroid representative of our valuables, such as the deed to your house or the key to your safety deposit box or your financial investments, quincunxes Uranus now. And Venus in Aquarius is approaching a square to Uranus and Taurus from the 3rd house to the 7th. So financial adjustments through the legislative process, and I failed to mention Venus is in the 11th house, which in mundane astrology is known as the house of the legislature, may take place between now and then that helps protect our assets. And what comes to mind is whether or not this new administration will continue to fund Ukraine, at least in the short term, in its efforts to ward off Russian control. Doing so, I like what Robert said about that, so we'll see, but doing so protects the partnership America has with NATO. And a sudden push to separate from NATO, such as the recently floated idea that NATO nations must increase their own defense budgets from 2% to 5% by the American government, may occur. Or the loss of those nations who wanted previously to become part of the EU and eventually NATO, such as Georgia, the former USSR province, and those members whose elections are swinging them likewise back towards stronger partnerships with Russia. such as the rise of the right in Germany. Not that they're aligned, but the talking points again back to that Mercury opposite Jupiter. And the talk for a long time that a lot of the right-wing media in this country are simply giving voice to Russian propaganda. All right. So to me, there's a huge indication in this chart that propaganda will continue. And there will, people are going to probably get more confused before they become clear. So I hope for the clarity. It's just a matter, I think, of how long it takes for people to kind of wake up and realize. I noticed one other thing that Uranus will eventually get before it goes into Gemini, which is I forget if it's June or July of 2025, right? It'll hit the Pleiades point, which is 29 Taurus, which is commonly known as a point that can affect one's eyesight. And on a symbolic level, because it's in Uranus, the Great Awakener, it makes me wonder if people are going to wake up about then to the blindness that they have exhibited to what is the truth and what is of true value, which is what Taurus or Venus's Taurus really represents to them, that is of most importance. So again, thank you. Hope I didn't go on too long.
Thank you, Sheri. Wow, may that be so. Okay, let's open it up to some comments. There's a lot to digest there.
I know.
Or not. Or go ahead, Ray.
Oh.
And then Robert.
I thought Robert was first. I thought it was extremely informative. Made me wish I had one of these magical calendars that I could put a big red dot on them and remember this date and that date and so forth. But it just means that I really appreciate what Sheri has put out there, because it gives us all something to look forward to and to be prepared for and to be more awake because we're more prepared.
Thank you.
I couldn't help but note Moon in Virgo specifically is related in mundane astrology to the armed forces and the farmers. And we had to have a farm bill. We had to have the armed forces paid. And that was what cut the stalemate. It was really the fact that the military was going to get stiffed for Christmas. The farmers were going to get stiffed for Christmas. And the relief was going to get stiffed for Christmas. And this is where I tumbled on this back when Reagan was president. That was when I realized that squares can be used very productively to cut to the chase. It just puts the brakes on all that Saturn-Jupiter ambivalence, and is it this, is it that? And it was the farmers' relief and the military that was what got everybody on the same page and got that thing passed. And that came down right at the solstice.
Right. In fact, the bill wasn't even signed until after the solstice occurred, because it was signed this morning into law by President Biden. But I want to add one comment to that. You're 100% correct. From what I understand, the thing that got left out was funding for children's cancer research or treatment or both. And that to me is the moon opposite. Well, the moon in Virgo, right? Maybe a little bit, Virgo is numbers, right? A penny pincher, Well, do we really have to give them that extra quarter, And opposite Saturn in the fourth house, which of course is naturally ruled by the moon. So it's a Cancerian thing to fund children's cancer research or medicine or whatever. And so that had to fall by the wayside, I think, shows us some of that Saturn-Jupiter or Jupiter-Saturn square with the moon involved, that something had to go. And that is in contrast to what you just said, Robert, that the military obviously is one of the most important things, that they deemed children to be one of the least important things. And of course, it's at a time when we have a legislature that doesn't really that claims to care more about the unborn than about the living. So, enough said.
Thank you. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, just one quick note. I really found it fascinating when you mentioned the Sun in Capricorn square the nodes of who's in charge. And the whole drama with, here we have Musk, Trump, but to expand it even broader, one name that wasn't mentioned too much is Joe Biden, who actually is technically the president in charge, and square the nodes, this whole drama of political power. Then you can extend it even further, and shouldn't the people of the country ideally be in charge, but perhaps we're not? Is there faith in those that are in charge of the branches of government? The last time I heard, it's really at an all-time low around faith in the Supreme Court, in Congress, in the executive branch. So this whole question of power, how is it being wielded? Who's got it? Do we trust them? Is the Sun in Capricorn square the nodes, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I'll just say briefly, that's why I mentioned also Pluto and Aquarius, because we've got a long haul with Pluto and Aquarius for 19 years. And if it's power, I look at Pluto very simply. It's either empowerment or disempowerment. So if the power is going to go to groups, that's the people. And so, we would assume that that's going to be happening. The United States is also in a Pluto return, which is the recurrence of a Revolutionary War. So there's many, many, many different things we could discuss about that. But just in a nutshell, it seems to me that Pluto and Aquarius for so long has to start to shift the balance of power away from the oligarchs and toward the people.
All right, thank you. Our fourth astro panelist is Eric Meyers, a counseling astrologer, author, and teacher. He's developed his astrological methodology for the past 25 years using a progressive Aquarian approach that integrates modern science, psychology, and universal spiritual principles. Eric has authored 7 astrology books, among them Uranus, The Constant of Change, Elements and Evolution, The Astrology of Awakening, and The Spiritual Dimensions of the Beatles. Eric's topics are Pluto's Ceres opposite Mars, Neptune conjunct the North Node, and Jupiter in Gemini trine Venus in Aquarius. Welcome, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Ray, for having me. Thanks to the other panelists. This is fascinating discussion. And what I'm going to offer is kind of for the individual. What are the spiritual lessons? And I'm not too wedded to Washington, D.C. with this discussion. You got to cast a chart for somewhere. So I just chose that. But we're not going to really look at house placement. And unlike Sheri, who just spoke about U.S. politics, that is relevant. But my focus is, as Robert said in his, you're going to have the planetary aspects that are going on no matter where you are in the globe. So we're not going to focus on houses, but more or less what are the spiritual lessons. And I identified a few things that I'm going to be highlighting. So one thing that really stuck in my mind that Sheri said is the whole off with his head type of idea. And I want to pick up on that and bring it to another perspective, is that we do have this Pluto-Mars opposition. And Ceres is also involved with things that are ideally nourishing and comfortable and secure. Ceres is the grain goddess. In my view, nourishment, like even early childhood types of consciousness, where ideally we like to feel secure, a bottle of milk and a hug. But with Pluto-Mars going on with it, not so much. Is that what we're looking at here is healing something that might have whacked us, that made us fall down, recovering from the off with their head previously, Pluto-Mars, Mars retrograde. So there's something healing around, not necessarily always violence, but a sense of being overwhelmed, overpowered, defeated. And this is why the North Node is in Aries, which is about regaining potency, courage, assertiveness, following through. Then Neptune conjunct the North Node, following through with some kind of vision, some kind of soul intention that we have. Then the Sun in Capricorn, we just talked about who's in charge, is to be in charge, to be more executive-minded, to be organized. In fact, this chart is really about getting back to work, which is the way I wrote about just this morning. There's a big focus on industriousness. Virgo moon, Saturn in Pisces, again, doing one's vision. Even Uranus in Taurus is another earth sign, although I believe Uranus is less highlighted here than the Grand Cross that so many have pointed out, and which is all about the mutable signs, what is our mindset, our spiritual purpose, what do we want to accomplish at a soul level is what those signs are speaking about. And then the industriousness is what is being welcomed in this chart. So winter is the season when the sun transits Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And those are the three most collective-oriented signs in the zodiac. And then Aries in the spring brings it back to the personal will. So there is a sense of having a humanitarian, collective, or even transpersonal focus. So to build the vision around that, what are we going to do on the everyday level, Virgo moon, to be organized and industrious in order to do our part to contribute to some kind of evolutionary purpose. Because what's not represented on this chart is a couple things that astrologers know is coming. And what they are is in the spring, Neptune and Saturn enter Aries. In the summer, Uranus enters Gemini and Jupiter enters Cancer. We have a whole bunch of sign changes, and 3 out of those 4, Saturn and Neptune getting to Aries and Jupiter into Cancer, is the entrance into a cardinal sign. And cardinal signs are about new beginnings, where things can take off in new directions. So what do we got to do now? Go within, regenerate our power, cultivate the vision, get organized, because in the spring and summer, there is a lot of potential for new directions based on the industriousness and the humanitarian focus that we might cultivate now. Also, Uranus in Gemini is highly energetic. You know, the movement from Taurus to Gemini, fixed earth to mutable air, is quite dramatic. And Uranus is electrical, jazzy, buzzing type of energy. So Uranus and Gemini, pretty tightly, almost exact, trine Pluto and Aquarius is not that far from now, which is, you know, very metaphysical, very much about new ideas, metaphysical visions, that type of thing. That's where we're headed. So now we got to get our proverbial ducks in a row. We got to finish projects, Virgo, in order to complete a vision. Then the other thing I wanted to note is Jupiter trine Venus in air signs. Is, of course, we can't do it all alone. There are allies out there. There are friends. There are communities. This is a very lively interchange around social and intellectual affiliation and the exchange of ideas with our allies. That ideally we're going to be getting our projects done. We're going to get organized. We're going to solidify the allies with others. And then, as I mentioned, in the spring and summer, there's a whole bunch of spirited energy to forge new connections all over the place. So with Neptune on the nodal axis, there very well might be, and I know I can speak from my own experience and many people I know, a real sense of disillusionment. There could be apathy, lethargy, why bother? Everything sucks. We've got blah, 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 fill in the blank, running the country. Some people are saying, I've heard a lot of kind of the sky is falling, why bother type of mentality and negativity. And that's the dark side of the Saturn Capricorn archetype. Well, with the Sun in Capricorn square the nodes, and the Sun is actually square the Neptune, is to resolve that and say the only way the world's going to change is if individuals do the high end of their chart. And that's what's being involved. Do your purpose and be the change you wish to see, as Gandhi would say. That's the only way. And so this is a lesson. This is a challenge to not give up, to be productive, and to not succumb to any sense of disillusionment or despair. And the first thing I said, to heal with that Pluto-Mars and Mars retrograde, heal something where we kind of fell down. And we're getting back up again and playing our role. That's what this chart says to me. And there are allies that are going to be available. And there is a lot of healing with Neptune on the North Node. The healing around the individual feeling in alignment with soul to do one's purpose. And that is the challenge in the work. And I think in deference to time, I'll pause it here and open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Eric. Go ahead, Ray.
So what really struck me in all of this is what I was thinking, and then Eric said it. So that's Neptune. I don't take credit. He doesn't take credit. It is what it is. But we either grow and expand our consciousness or give up. And the choice is very clear. The difficulty is very clear, but the necessity is even more clear. So we either learn from this or we don't. All of what we've said so far, I'm not really ready to do my part yet, I suppose. I don't know if it's my turn yet, but in this whole discussion, we're really talking about what people are doing with the astrological energy. To talk about the astrological energy, you need to differentiate between the solar will and the ego will. And if people are going to ascend within themselves to their higher self, then they have to identify with the solar will. And that is a difficult thing to do in a world where, as Noam Chomsky says, if you have a job, you're a slave. Because you're doing the corporate work. You're doing the nasty, horrible work. But if you don't have a job, you're going to starve. So that's kind of the situation that we're in. A crossroads, I believe, is the best word for it. The one where this is the chicken, we are the chicken, and we've got to cross the road. Never mind why, we just got to.
Thank you, Ray. Go ahead, Liz.
Oh, took me 2 clicks. I'd like to make a note because I think we've talked a lot about Pluto and the Pluto return, U.S. Pluto return. The Pluto return is to the Declaration of Independence, which was an agreement by separate colonies to get together and fight. It's different than the U.S. Constitution chart, which has Pluto around 17 Aquarius, where they actually formed a nation. So there's actually quite a lengthy Pluto return from 1776 to 1787 that what we're returning to is the colonial agreement to fight to fight the Britons and to overthrow taxation without representation. At no point in 1776 were they agreeing to create a new nation. And they hadn't built any of that Bill of Rights or constitutional infrastructure. So what we're actually returning to is the fight. The prime purposes of why people fight and try to get rid of oppressive systems, rather than the agreement to unify and create something new. So there's a difference there. And I just remind people is, yeah, it is a return, but what is it returning to? Okay. And Neptune is sextile that US Pluto from 1776. We still have a vision of ourselves as this union of separate states, right? Well, 50 states plus a bunch of territories. But when Neptune gets involved, it tends to dissolve and remake things. And Neptune node, especially, that node conjunction is February 6th at 28 Pisces. It's very sextile, that 1776 Pluto. And I get this feeling almost like we're sort of, as a collective, reinventing ourselves, not necessarily needing to tear it apart, but to reestablish identity. And that's very much that Sun node conjunction. And with Mars opposite Pluto, Mars rules that rising in Washington, D.C. It's retrograde, it's opposite Pluto. Anybody with their hands on the wheels is going to have a bumpy ride. It's worse than herding cats, if there could be anything worse. It's like herding tigers and lions, I think. But I would just say, because it's Pluto in the fight chart, at the Fight Club moment, rather than at the constitutional moment, the issue of the return brings up stuff from the fight, not from the Constitution. There's a separation there. So just to make some clarity about what the return centers on and what we are focusing on with that Pluto energy as it moves into Aquarius. They were in the middle of the Revolutionary War with Pluto entering Aquarius. They had already made the agreement to work together, but they hadn't agreed to unify yet. Just putting that out there.
Thanks, Liz.
Okay.
Sheri.
Hi, I don't want to belabor it, but this is a lot of what I talk about on my podcast and have in the past. First of all, the Pluto return started in 1775 when this Revolutionary War started, and in my mind ended in 1789 when we inaugurated the first U.S. president and also sat the first Supreme Court. But on another note, so we're in that period now, and I agree with what Liz said, but there was a fight, right? It was also echoed when Neptune opposed the Sibley chart anyway, Neptune, and we had the Civil War. So first the colonies fought against the monarchy, and then the states fought against the federal government. And I said a long time ago, we're in a recurrence of the states fighting the federal government. Okay, enough said. And to Eric's point, I think it's interesting. I just got a copy of Timothy Snyder's On Freedom book. And one of the things I'm only, just dipping into it, he talks about what is freedom, right? And how people have the wrong idea of what freedom means. And as the nodes shift in January from South Node Libra to the North Node Aries, which is, don't get stuck in partnerships and what Stephen Forrest calls polite dishonesty and going along to get along, and say your piece. And, especially with Chiron in Aries as well, where there's a wound to speaking out, right? We'll shift into the Neptune North Node, which to me is, again, as you were saying, Eric, on a personal level, right, not just a collective, is to move to the idea that freedom is about empathy, which is what I was just reading in Timothy Snyder's book, right? Because if you think freedom is about your own individual independence, then you're stuck in a kind of little, barricade. But if your freedom is to understand another person's plight and to understand that they have different thoughts from you, different perspectives and things like that, and then obviously to have empathy for them, that's where we should be heading.
Thank you, Sheri. All right, then. Our fifth astro panelist is Elizabeth Hazel, a professional astrologer, tarotist, rune reader, public speaker, and author. She's produced numerous articles on astrology, tarot, and metaphysics for magazines and journals, and has authored several books, including Little Book of Fixed Stars, Expanded Second Edition, and Antisha, Secrets in the Mirror. Liz will discuss house rulerships, planetary strengths, and fixed stars in Antisha in the Solstice chart and the Capricorn new moon chart that happens on December 30th. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. I guess I'm looking at this a little bit differently because I'm picking up fixed stars. Mercury especially, it is close to Antares. It's tightly conjunct Han, which is Apiaka's star. It's in joy in the first house. And if you think of it, Mercury is the psychopompus with the caduceus who guides souls in and out of their bodies at birth and death. And so having Mercury in joy in the first house is the body. It's when we incarnate. So Mercury is in joy in the first house. It loves being there, but it's in detriment, and it's close to some kind of tricky fixed stars with Han and Antares. Now, Antares has a range of meanings. It's particularly pugnacious in a way. It's linked to destruction and fires, burning things down, just destruction. But it's also considered in some respects a very protective star, and is about protecting your goods and your efforts and your legacy. So there's sort of a very diametric set of meanings for that. But having Mercury in joy means it's in a house that it likes being in. It is in the process of bringing a soul into a body. It's incarnating. So it's particularly active, curious, energetic. It's doing what it does best. So even though it's in a bad sign, it's in a great place. It's also trine Mars, and Mars rules the ascendant. So it's in agreement with its ruler. Okay. So I see that Mercury is bringing out that feistiness, that really feisty Mars, Antares. I'm going to protect what's mine. People are going to be focused on taking care of their own stuff, making sure that their assets, what they own, what they hold, is protected and secure, and that this is mine. I don't want anybody messing with my stuff, basically. So I think you're going to find a very strong protective urge through the next 2 to 3 months of people saying, that's my territory, you can't mess with that. So we already had some of that with the budget process, obviously. But I do think that there's going to be this Mars trine Mercury energy, which is very fiery and feisty, and saying, oh, I don't think so. So there's pushback, okay? Things that people trying to make happen, it's kind of, no. That's my stuff. You can't mess with my stuff. It's in my body. It's in my incarnation. I'm not letting go of it. And Mars is in a fixed sign, retrograde or not. It's still fixed. It wants its stuff where it put it last. Don't lose your stuff and don't let go of it. The sun is always going to be conjunct Sinistra at winter solstice, at least for some years. And it's also an Apiaka star. And as Eric mentioned, and Sheri and others, it's square the nodes. And it's interesting because Apiaka, one of the names of it is the snake charmer. You're drawing something out that isn't necessarily visible right off the bat. And what comes out of the basket when you charm the snake, when you play the horn to get it to rise up out of the basket. We don't always know. And I see that sun square node as being a kind of mysterious process of what song will lift the snake, what will help us see what it is we're supposed to be becoming. And because the nodal axis is constantly going back and forth, there's this tug and pull influence around that sun. Is this our identity? Well, maybe not. Is this? There may be different images and ideas to consider before we really have a grasp on the identity of what we are, what we're becoming. And I find it interesting that even though the sun is of primal importance in a solstice chart, Leo is intercepted in the 9th house and Mars is in the sign. right? So we have this Leo presence, but Leo doesn't rule a cusp. It's like saying, okay, well, the moon is in there and Mercury's in there with that influence, but the sun, it doesn't really get to rule a house here, which is interesting. But it does get to rule Mars retrograde. Pluto is on Terra Z. It's close to the stars of Aquila, but by visual astrology, that's a little bit different. Visual astrology versus taking the longitudinal degree of a star. There are two different types of ways to read fixed stars. I find the longitudinal way is, quick and easy, and it seems to work. But having Pluto conjunct the stars of Altair and then moving into the Goat's Head, those are some pretty strong stars. And especially with Aquila, it's the eagle that swoops in and grabs what it wants, which is contrary to what Mercury and Mars are saying is don't mess with my stuff. And there's Pluto swooping in. So Mars has that protective job. In ancient myth, Ares, Mars, the old Mars, was less of a military god and more of a protector, more of an agricultural protector deity. So maybe that protective side is being brought to the forefront with Mars conjunct Altarf, which is Beta Cancer. Well, what does Cancer do? It wants to protect its home. It wants to protect its land. It wants to protect the harvest that it's collected. It's very protective, and it has that shell effect. So it's almost like Mars is holding up its shield and saying, I'm not going to let that Pluto come in and swoop in and take my stuff. So there's multiple signs in this chart of this protective turf, protective energy. Venus in the third house, I just love it. Venus is conjunct Swalloson, which is one of the stars in the Dolphin constellation. The Dolphin's a small constellation. There's only a few stars in it, but it's connected with laughter, and it's in the third house. So I figure the comedians are going to be having a heyday. So if people feel discouraged or apathetic or, having that Neptune North node, I just want to give up, the comedians are going to be on fire with Venus trine Pluto. And, use laughter to boost yourself. Me, whenever I'm depressed, I watch a Mel Brooks movie. It always works. Or I watch Monty Python, or I watch, old episodes of Get Smart, or something that makes me laugh, because that is so therapeutic. I also think with Pluto, one of the best ways to fix Pluto energies, if you're feeling that kind of like, okay, I'm on a tour through hell, I need some relief, you listen to drumming. It brings out that primal energy. So drumming therapy, listening to drumming CDs, listening to 435 hertz CDs, those things kind of heal that really kind of visceral sense of Pluto tearing things apart or trying to scratch at the safety barriers that we have in place. I did notice, of course, the Grand Cross. It's difficult and tense. At this moment, Uranus is conjunct Zarak, which is actually a star in Eridanus. It's kind of a sad little thing. It's kind of a sad little star because Eridanus stars are all very Saturnian. So it picks up quite a bit of Saturn energy. It's also in the term and bound of Saturn. So even though it's Uranus in Taurus, and it will move towards Capulus and Algol, which are all very close. All these stars are packed really close in the late degrees of Taurus. Right now, it's almost mired in Saturnian energies. And the other thing that people may not notice is that Mars is conjunct Uranus by Antition. So you're getting all this sort of protective Saturnian, preservation. But Saturn is also a planet of loss and a planet of limitation and restriction. What is being restricted or lost or reserved or preserved, trying to keep it safe. I do kind of think there will be, with any kind of Grand Cross, this kind of heckling dialogue going back and forth about what we should keep, what we should let go of, what needs to be torn apart or dismantled, what should be preserved but just overhauled. I'm not big on dismantling. Destruction is easy. Bam, bam, rubble, man. Whack it with his little bam bam and it's destroyed, right? It only takes an infant to destroy stuff. Creating things or rebuilding things takes intelligent people who know what they're doing and who can accomplish bringing a vision to light. It's a lot harder to create than destroy. So I'm not particularly impressed with people saying, we're going to tear this apart. It's like, yeah, but that's easy. A bam bam rubble can do it. I would respect them more and people more if they're saying, I have a vision for how to recreate something or how to make it better. And I don't think as a general public, we should be satisfied with people saying they're going to destroy stuff. We need people who are visionary. If they're not visionary, then they shouldn't be leading. That's my opinion. I like visionary leaders. The star on the midheaven is Megrez, which is the paw of the bear. And when Mama Bear gets ticked off, boy, what does she do? Wham! Slow to anger, but once Mama Bear is angry, whoo, baby. I would be very cautious right now to anybody that's in government because Mama Bear could get angry and stay angry. The moon is conjunct Coxa, which is the lower back star of Leo. It's like the hip bone or the lower pelvis bones of Leo. And it's interesting because it's kind of like saying, what will break the back? What will break your back? And I mean, anybody that has lower back problems, raise your hand, is going to be feeling that is what is going to be the tipping point. What is going to get me to the point where I'm angry? What is going to be enough is enough? What is that straw that breaks the camel's back or breaks the lion's back? There's going to be a moment when it gets broken. And I think we just saw that with the assassination of Brian Thompson, is it kind of broke the back. And then there was this enormous festering lava flow of anger at the insurance industry. All that anger was focused and directed from the public going, we've had enough of this. Our healthcare system is broken and it's ongoing. So I think that's part of that grand cross. I also would point out again with Antitions, Saturn is such an active player in this chart. Its Antition is at 17 Libra in opposition to Chiron. And what I've found again and again and again in research charts is that Saturn, who is Chiron's dad, is the only one who can really rein him in when he gets out of line. So when there's illegal activity, when there's people that are making big statements or, promising big things and it's not legal, it doesn't fit in with our traditions, it doesn't work with how our United States processes work, Saturn reins it in. It can stop it or it can rein it in. It's getting this one last whack at kind of pulling in the Chiron stampede, the pack mentality, the, kind of lawlessness. It has that effect on it. And that also being in the 11th house of legislature in Libra is saying, what are the rules that we operate by? You can't just say you're going to cut 2 trillion. You're not a member of the government. You have no decision-making power. You don't have that power. And Mercury trine Mars, protective. This is our turf. We decide what gets cut. We're the members of Congress. Some guy that's a billionaire can't walk in and tell us how to do our jobs. So I think what you're going to find is turf wars about goals that people have stated, but they have no real way to carry it out. Saturn's going, no, we're reining you in. You can't do that. We can consult with you, but you can't tell us what to do. So I see this as a very powerful chart in terms of clashing, but I also pointed out in my typed up notes onto the side there that it's a lunar chart. It's nocturnal. It's not a diurnal chart. The moon is above the horizon. The sun is below the horizon. This is a nocturnal chart, which means that the nocturnal sect members, Jupiter and Saturn, they have less power. They just do. It's not a diurnal day chart where Saturn and Jupiter are at full strength. And when you get diurnal sect planets in angular houses, Firmicus says, no, this is like endless difficulties. So I do see this as a very bumpy, difficult chart, but it's also has a couple of things that give us an edge. Mercury trines Mars, Venus trine Jupiter, mystic rectangle with the nodes in Neptune, and sextiles and trines to Mars, Pluto. What do mystic rectangles do? They solve problems. Two opposition axes need those sextiles and trines to find solutions. I don't think, as has been said before here, the first answer won't do the trick. It's got to get bounced around a bit. People are going to change their minds a lot because Jupiter's retrograde. It's weak. It's in Gemini. It's not quite at Rigel, but I think that whole idea of, well, we tried this idea, but people didn't agree with it. So let's go to this idea and see if that works. It's almost like kind of saying everything has to get bounced around 4 or 5 times before anybody will agree with it. So don't despair. Now, that Neptune node conjunction's on February 5th at 28 Pisces. After that, there's quite a few major lineups in March. And that 10 Aries gets hit again and again with a Venus retrograde, a Mercury retrograde, and a solar eclipse. 10 Aries is going to be a hot spot, very hot spot. And Chiron in this chart is conjunct the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse point. So it's kind of saying what is being eliminated. Solar eclipse points, especially a total solar eclipse that covered the entire continent. It transferred across the entire continent. What is being preserved and what is being eliminated? Solar eclipses erase the blackboard, and Chiron is sitting right there. Saturn's antecedent opposes it. I kind of think some of the cronyism and the fragmentation that has been causing so many delays in Congress, that also could be eliminated or become so problematic that people act more dramatically to tamp it down or to sideline it so it's not so distracting or destructive or prevents things from getting done. I think it's going to be very strategic. I think we're going to find people doing what I would call, quick strategic thinking on their feet, quick tactical thinking. So move to the next page, please. This is the new moon in Capricorn, and I did want to show this chart because the sun and moon are conjunct Fasces, which is the face of the archer, and it's conjunct Pallas as well. Now, Fasces is another one of those. It's a nebula that's connected with bad eyesight. Most nebula are, and blindness. But it is also, in a more maybe revamped sense, is about looking at things through a different perspective, taking a different look. And I would almost say, like, I just had to renew my driver's license. So it's like they shine those little lights on the edge of the testing thing to see if you've got peripheral vision, right? And so Fasces is like, it's not necessarily what's directly in front of us, but what's out in the periphery that isn't quite visible yet in full, but could become increasingly important throughout this lunar cycle. And by this point, we've got, Mercury is past his squares to Jupiter and Saturn. That's been completed. And now the moon is joining the sun in Capricorn and saying, let's take another look. Let's see what's at the edges that might not be obvious, but gosh, maybe it works better. So I just see this as a very much constantly evolving quarter from winter solstice to spring equinox. Things will continually churn. There's a kind of this unending churning factor going on, especially like what Sheri's saying, the nodes are going to change signs. They're going to back into the Pisces Virgo axis and North Node with Neptune. I see that as being in early February. February 6th, I think, is the exact conjunction to the true node. I see it as being like, be aware if you're feeling fearful. in the Vedic sense, the North Node represents fears and phobias. And I find that to be somewhat true. Even though it draws us towards things, it's saying this is this big thing. It's like fear of that is the initial response. It's a primal response to something new and unknown and unsecure, or that we don't know what's going to happen. We can't guarantee there's a safety net. If we take the leap to that new thing, is there going to be a safety net to catch us? Well, probably not, right? But I think that being aware of your fears and phobias, don't lapse into fear. Don't lapse into apathy as January goes into February. Fear and apathy are exactly the wrong responses. Think of it as a smorgasbord because it's Pisces, right? And it's Sheat, the star in Pegasus, is right there with that conjunction. It's like saying this is a bumpy ride, but it's also a smorgasbord. I can do little taste tests of ideas and things that are coming out without eating the entire banquet. So handling things in a Pisces fashion, break it down into a lot of little components, little tiny pieces, do the Aquarius thing with Venus and Aquarius, and compartmentalize it a little bit and say, this tiny piece I don't like, but this little tiny piece, I could live with that. Yeah. And so then it isn't overwhelming or all-consuming fear. You've broken it down into component pieces, compartmentalized them, taste tested them, and decided what is worth your worry and anxiety and what is like, it's just business as usual. But I do worry about the Neptune node conjunction because people who are fearful do not always have good reactions. Sometimes they aren't always rational. And I do think we have to worry about, people being a little crazy. And by this point, Mars is backed up enough to trine the node, and it will move into Cancer and trine that Neptune node conjunction. Mars is the father of fear. One of his children is named Phobos, right? He's the father of phobias and fears. So I think we really have to watch for people who are at the edge and reacting out of fear and building them up. So that's my comment for these charts. And I wanted to bring the new moon in because I think it adds a little oomph to what is so important in the solstice chart. It gets, I think, even more focused on that new moon on December 30th. Okay. Discuss amongst yourselves.
Thank you, Liz. All right. Would anyone like to comment on any of the points that Liz has brought up? Go ahead, Sheri.
I just want to add to what Liz just said about the nodes shifting. So the South Node will be in Virgo and the North Node in Neptune. In evolutionary astrology, the reason why, as Liz terms it, you fear the North Node is because it's highly unfamiliar. Yeah. The South Node in evolutionary astrology is where you have great familiarity and that becomes habitual behavior. And not all habitual behavior is positive. So, I just want to add that when you're looking at the South Node shifting into Virgo, you're looking at an energy where what I've noticed, and this is anecdotal, but in client readings and friends and things, is that a South Node in Virgo is a lot of times, not always, but comes from an early life or past life karmic environment where their environment was controlled. And so they need to control their environment. That's what they think. That's the habitual pattern. So people with OCD, for example, or people, if we relate it to our current governmental situation controlling people's lives, not only in the US, but globally, right? And movement towards the Piscean North Node is very much a let go and let God. Let go and creator, source, goddess, universe, control things. And a movement away from being tense and being, oh my God, there's a place for everything and everything in its place. And if I don't put everything in its place, then something terrible is going to happen because it lends itself towards superstition, right? But when you say, no, the universe is benign and it has my best interests at heart, and I have to open myself up to things like prayer and meditation and allowing my intuitive self to know better than that fearful Virgo and, oh my God, what if everything gets out of control? So I think it's a time when we can release our need to control ourselves and our own environments, and let go and let God, as they say. And that can have repercussions from everything from the collective and things that happen in the collective, as above, so below, that filter down to anyone's individual life.
Thank you, Sheri. Okay. Our final astro panelist is Ray Couture, an astrological counselor and life coach for over 50 years who has presented numerous workshops and lectures. He created a film company, Metamedia, to produce the only existing record of a lecture by Dane Rudhyar, his teacher-mentor. Ray produces a monthly astrology report, Astrological Perspectives, and this New Horizons podcast, which is available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ray will compare the heliocentric versus geocentric chart for the winter solstice and the fingers of fate. You're up, Ray.
Okay. First, thank you to Sheri and Elizabeth, Eric, Cayelin, Robert. The information that we are sharing here from all of you is absolutely beautiful and helpful and wonderful. What I want to say about the winter solstice is that the importance of what we understand at the solstice may well determine our immediate future. And immediate is a stretchable term. Human mentality and thought must be transformed. And that is the basic spiritual message of the heliocentric chart, which I believe is the one on the right. It requires us to abandon ego concerns, all of which we spoke about at great length, and open up the intellectual mentality to its higher, more spiritual dimension if we expect to achieve any real improvement. This is my overall kind of point of view, but looking at these chart on the left is the geocentric chart. And I use a system where I note the first planet to rise because, after all, it is a rotating Earth. The first planet to rise is Mercury in the geocentric chart, and the last, not planet, but the moon, is the last. And the Mercury is in Sagittarius, asking us to elevate our consciousness so that we can improve our relationship to the world and to the way we govern ourselves, because the moon is in the 10th house. But then you look at the heliocentric chart, and our wonderful Mercury in Sagittarius has become Mercury in Virgo. That's a square Mercury, square Mercury. We may have to readjust our voices to be more uplifting and less degrading and less fighting and less of all this, because as many of us have said here today, many of you have said here today, that we're at a revolutionary point, which is very similar to the period of time from 1775 to 1889 when the Constitution was created. We are at a revolutionary point where we have to decide whether this experiment was worth the effort, or are we going to just let it go? We are going to have to let it go because it is time to recreate it and bring it back to its original purpose, which has changed in a certain sense because we have a better understanding of what the so-called Enlightenment had done to create this whole political reality of overthrowing kings and queens and so forth. That's what led to the formation of the United States. It had nothing to do with religion. As a matter of fact, most of the philosophers of the time thought of religion as the worst thing that ever happened to humanity, especially Christianity. So this whole situation with vis-a-vis Christian nationalism and the oligarchies and all of that kind of stuff, with the heliocentric chart with Mercury in the Capricorn decan or Virgo, the people have to exercise some sort of critical analysis of that government, or else we will not be able to communicate any sort of third house Pluto transformation of our thought is what we need if we want to be able to raise our thought up to being able to effectively criticize the government in order to be able to change how it relates to us and to the rest of the world. So in the heliocentric chart, we have essentially the view of the spirit. I do that because I know the sun is a living organism, because I know cosmologists tell me the cosmos is conscious and aware of itself. With each of our pair of human eyes being born, the cosmos sees itself. But the geocentric point of view is, I made a sort of a Freudian slip once and said it's an egocentric chart. And then I had to put myself through a whole analysis. Yes, it is. It's about us as individual separate things because we've grown up in a materialist world. It is the end of the hegemony of the material view that is what is dealing with all of this. The material view has brought us to the absurdity of the billionaire class determining what we can see, what we can learn, what we can know, what we can do, and what we can't do. Because they'll make sure we can't do it because they have all the money. And money has become God, has become the empowerer. The reason heliocentric is important because it's the cosmic view. As the sun sees things, as we are. From a certain perspective, astrology is about self-realization. And this whole period of time is a challenge for us to realize more of what we are because we have sold ourselves into the slavery of having too much freedom. Not enough focus on what is important versus what is fun. We've been having fun for 50 years. Living in an imperial colonial society, the breakup of Britain just spread it. We have a president who is leaving office who says he's a proud Zionist. Ooh. So the whole idea of Pluto in the heliocentric chart is, remember Pluto's position in the solar system? The sun, the solar system, is who we are. Pluto's position is at the very end or the very beginning of that solar system, and it imbues the whole reality with this question. You want to live or do you want to die? The Bible puts it into, and I don't go with the Bible all that much, but puts it into, I have set before thee life and death, therefore choose life. The Pluto function is to remind us that that's the choice. We're going to continue and grow, or we're going to dissolve and die. And if we are the cosmos, which is the heliocentric point of view, then we have to start becoming aware of where we are in the cosmos, the galaxy. That's why the stuff that Cayelin put up there was really important, because it's a continuing development of an understanding of our address and whether the weather at that address is going to be what we like or what we don't like, but we have to know where we are. And the whole situation with the geocentric chart is that people do not know where they are. They only know where the situation is on the planet with regard to its rulers. And all of the situation that we're facing politically in the heliocentric chart has Venus and Mercury and Mars completely different places. From the geocentric perspective, the moon exists. From this heliocentric position, people are manifestations of the cosmos. They're not individual egos. So changing our perspective on what to think about ourselves is as important as what to think about how to handle the changes that the government and the politicians are about to try to manifest. But Mercury, Mars, and Venus are all in different houses in each of these charts, and that helps us understand the spiritual intent of these three planets. The ego intent we already aware of. We've been talking about it. The spiritual intent of these planets versus the egoic needs that are now paramount in the geochart. The heliochart invites us to listen to the cues for moving deeper into and more directly in the spiritual direction. Mercury in Sagittarius is the first house of the geocentric chart, but elevated to Virgo in the 10th house of the heliocentric chart. The dynamic between egoic needs, everyday consciousness, and the spiritual intellect opening up in the 10th house are square to and so present a crisis which is best understood as an opportunity for improvement. Venus is in Aquarius in the 3rd house of the geocentric chart and in the 6th house in Taurus of the heliocentric. It indicates spiritual forces are holding to deeper and longer standing values in the midst of all this fear about potential economic and social transformations that is currently roiling the egoic world. The retrograde Mars in Leo, 9th house, higher consciousness, Supreme Court of the geocentric chart, expresses the lack of ability to effectively pursue legal and foreign policy objectives. Mm-hmm. The Mars of the heliocentric is in the 8th house of what is weak, of relationship results, indicating that our need for transmuting karma into dharma, thus in a more nurturing and less aggressive way. The retrogradation of Mars in the geocentric chart reveals the lack of spiritual consciousness which sits at the helm of the ship of Earth careening toward potential disaster, potential salvation, potential correction. The heliocentric Mars is held back by being in the 8th house, held back by its fear of inadequacy and inability and having an inadequate faith in the reality of the spirit as represented by the heliocentric view. Add to that, Moon in the geocentric chart at just 2 degrees ahead of the heliocentric Mercury. Both are in Virgo, suggesting that the people, 10th house Moon, need to have a clear intellectual grasp of social political reality at 10th house Mercury. The Aquarius Pluto in the 3rd house, mind, quality of thought, serves to intensify the concept of change, because Pluto energy is involved in the most basic level of everyday life and social communication. Individual minds are thus opened here to the thought of considering how to relate to the changes underway, how to relate to it differently, something different than common everyday fear that I stopped watching the news. It's all propaganda. So to repeat, the importance of what is understood at the solstice could determine the future, immediate future, the way we see our life in the next 5 or 10 years. Human mentality and thought here, according to the heliocentric view, must be transformed, are about to be transformed, are in the process of being transformed. That's the basic spiritual message. Now, as far as the ideas of the finger of fate, one of them is legitimately clearly that in the geocentric chart, which involves a square, involves a sextile, between Pluto and the North Node in the heliocentric chart. Pluto and the North Node. Everything was said about the North Node, I have no disagreement, but I would like to add that it's the challenge. Neptune is in the Cancer part of Pisces. So the North Node is challenging individual people to increase their spirituality, their sense of beingness spirit. That is quincunx to the Virgo 10th house from Pluto as well as from the North Node. And the productivity of this kind of sextile relationship is an if-then kind of a question. If we change our minds, then we can put our insecurities and our desires to work and becoming more integrated spiritually as a people, as individuals as well. The one that has to do with the geocentric chart is a little less accurate in a sense because it combines a sextile between two non-so-called objects, part of fortune in the 8th house and the 10th house Virgo, but Pluto is still there. So this involves, if we are effective in reviving and changing ourselves, it will give us an opportunity to improve the way we relate as a people, not only to government, but as a people through the government. Right now, the government is a block. It's in the way of people growing and expressing themselves, and that is what we have to understand. The government has to be opened up to allow people to express themselves, and that's something that I think is added by Thor's hammer in the geocentric chart, which takes Jupiter and the moon. Do you have the Thor's hammer? Yeah. Jupiter in Gemini, in the Libra decan of Gemini, so the rising above, the recycling of our understanding of this conflict, Gemini in Libra, it's a value conflict. Those who believe in growth and those who believe in stasis, things the way they are. Let me make all the money I can possibly make. Let me be as free as I want to be. The hell with the rest of you. Well, that Jupiter is in a sesquiquadrate to Pluto in Aquarius, and that is sesquiquadrate to the moon in Virgo. The Thor's hammer says, bam, it is revive and change your thoughts and change your mind. Understand where you are and what is actually changing. That's all I can say.
I think you just dropped the hammer. I think you just dropped the hammer.
I did.
Or is it the mic?
I hit the mic.
All right. Go ahead, Sheri.
Ray, I absolutely love what you said about the finger of fate and the yod, the one in the heliocentric chart, because to me, it felt like the 8th house redistribution of wealth, like the sextile to the midheaven, right, is the gaining the reputation of redistribution of wealth to the local areas in the 3rd house of Pluto, which I think is very much, I don't know if you can hear me, sorry, which is very much in play, one of the arguments right now. Is it local, or is it bigger than that? And if you can't touch people on a local level in their neighborhood, they're going to be a lot less likely to understand and appreciate or whatever, how things are working for them.
Thank you, Sheri. Anyone else?
Above and the sun below. And Richard's idea about that was basically that with the moon above, people should give individual meaning to collective social ideals and values, which is really what I was trying to say. Because that's being blocked. That's being told we can't do that. We can't decide what our government is going to do, which is antithetical to the whole history of what I grew up with, what all of us have grown up with. And we're now told that's not going to be allowed anymore. And that is somehow or other an improvement. I don't think it's a good idea to focus too much on the political reality in this sense, because Thor's hammer is still hammering. Because the politicians are egoically motivated. They're wanting you to pay attention to them and vote for them. They're not talking about spirit growth, development. They're talking about themselves and nothing else. So paying attention to them is, yes, because here comes another swash of the sword, duck. Okay. Knowing what these illusions are about to do is important. But don't forget to remember that they don't know what they're doing. You do.
I'd like to thank our panelists, Cayelin, Robert, Sheri, Eric, Elizabeth, and Ray, for sharing your astrological insights into the 2024 winter solstice, and to you, our audience, for taking the time to join us. Blessings to you all in the new year.
Thanks for listening.
Peace on earth.
Enjoyed this topic? Support future consciousness raising podcasts by visiting newhorizonspodcast.org.